The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.
This is the Movie Health Podcast. This is where we talk about movies and mental health. My name is Catherine, and today we speak to Pei.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Pei is a clinical psychologist and a PhD candidate at the Sydney Law School, University of Sydney. Her PhD research investigates the role of expert evidence in facilitating child participation in child protection matters in New South Wales, Australia. Pei is a research assistant at the Research Centre for Children and Families within the University of Sydney. Pei's research interests include promoting therapeutic jurisprudence and advocating for children's rights through social justice frameworks. Pei's clinical psychology experience includes assisting a court-appointed expert in conducting expert assessments over the last 11 years. She is also a practicing clinical psychologist with special interests in supporting clients with a history of complex trauma, as well as clients from culturally diverse and ethnic minority backgrounds. Thank you so much, Pei, for being willing to be interviewed today.
Oh, thank you for the invite.
When we first met each other, we had a lot to talk about since we're both in private practice. And I know that, your work is very, very fascinating, and we'll talk about it a bit more later on in the podcast. But first, let's talk about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So you chose this movie, and I guess you would say it's your favorite film?
Yeah, favorite in the sense that I think I grew up with the movie and it's got sort of nostalgic origins for me as well. I think I watched, I can't remember exactly how many times I watched it, but the first time I watched it was with Grandma. So for context, I didn't grow up in Australia. I grew up in Malaysia, and most of the movies in Malaysia were mostly, westernized in English. And this was one of the few movies that was in Chinese that was sort of framed towards a Western audience, but also permitted my family in particular, who didn't speak a lot of English, to follow. And also, there were lots of actors and actresses that we were familiar with. So, yeah, lots of good memories associated with this movie.
Yeah, and I guess that's, part of what makes movies so powerful is that it's kind of tied to our memories and experiences and even, I guess, in cultural roots. So I just wanted to do a quick intro about the film. So it was made in 2000. It's a martial arts adventure drama directed by Ang Lee, and it was adapted from the book by Wang Dulu. It stars Michelle Yao, Zhang Ziyi, Chang Yun-fat, Cheng Pei-pei, and Chang Chen. I think I said all their names okay. So the film is about Master Li Mubei, a warrior, is about to retire and gives his sword to his lover, Yu Shu Lian, to keep it safe. However, the sword is stolen, and now an embittered Li embarks on a mission to find it. So the film itself actually, just looking at Wikipedia, it grossed $128 million in the US, which made it the highest grossing foreign film produced Mandarin language film in American history. And it was the film that was the first foreign language film to break the $100 million mark in the US. It also received universal acclaim from critics. It was praised for its story, its direction, cinematography, and martial arts sequences. It also won over 40 awards and was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Foreign Language Film, Best Art Direction, Original Score, and Cinematography. It also received the most nominations ever for a non-English language film at the time. And it won 4 BAFTAs, 2 Golden Globe Awards. And in retrospect, it's considered as one of the greatest films of the 21st century. So for you personally, Pei, why do you say it's your favorite film?
Interesting. I think when you look back to why you first watched a movie and how you reflect over why it's important to you now, I think there's been a lot of change. But when I first watched it, I think I was about 14 maybe, and
Mm.
at the time, growing up in Malaysia was very much about my role as a young woman, and gender stereotype roles of what that would look like for me. And I think what was really enticing for me was the main characters, the main protagonists were women in this movie, and that's very different to how women are usually portrayed
Mm.
in a lot of the Chinese films, anyways. And it was almost reminiscent of the storyline in Disney's Mulan, where it's about this woman who's super strong, and she um, sort of transcends her role and fits into what is usually a really male-dominated society.
Mm.
And just brief diversion, our family is actually really close to Michelle Yeoh, and this was before
Oh.
she became very famous. So she's more a family friend. I'd never seen her as a movie star. So at the time, it was almost like, oh, let's just go watch this person that we know through the family at the movies, and not, realizing just how big an impact she had. And obviously, she's risen to stardom since then. Um, but I think for me, I sort of related to a lot of the themes in the movie. So it talks about love, honor, duty, and loyalty, which I see it now as it's very so geared towards Asian values, whereas and sort of Oriental centric themes. And I hadn't thought any differently because that was the world I grew up in. And having moved to Australia and obviously lived very differently and have a more westernized sort of lifestyle now, I look at the themes and go, oh, that was, that resonated with me and grandma. And I was actually reflecting in the same way that a lot of families in Australia or indeed the Western world, will watch Home Alone 1, 2, and 3 over Christmas.
Mm.
This movie was what I would watch with grandma when I catch up with grandma. So she remains in Malaysia. And for us, this movie was very much about women being strong. I think that was sort of the main message. And I was very lucky that my grandfather and grandmother were all about, you don't have to stick to being this good girl that's, wears pretty dresses. We want you to be strong. We want you to have the courage and the strength to do what you love and what you're good at. And I think they were ahead of their times because it wasn't the mainstream view. And this movie was probably the first movie where I felt like I did have permission to transcend that, the gender ascribed roles, because Malaysia is a very a Muslim based country. That was our national religion. So I think there were a lot of gender based stereotypes, and to a certain extent, I think I felt shackled to societal rules at the time. And I think what I loved about this movie was it was more about women being strong, women chasing their dreams, chasing what they wanted, but also advocating for what was important to them from a value-based perspective. Yeah, and it was, breaking free of those traditional gender-based roles attached to men and women.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. The film is very empowering, and it's interesting that you mentioned Mulan. It's actually my favorite Disney film.
I know.
For that very reason. Like,
yes.
I've seen that movie so many times. Like, I can't even count. And as a child or as a young person, I used to actually recite the whole movie. And of course, every now and then, like, watch the main song, "Make a Man Out of You," if I wanted to feel empowered. Like, just. Yeah,
Yes,
was it a thing for you as well? Yeah.
It is. I think there are a lot of parallels. And I think Mulan was probably a close second to this movie. So
Yes. Yes, yeah, definitely. But yeah, and I'm really curious. I know you kind of mentioned it, but what's your grandmother's perspective about the film? So, I mean, the last time you watched it with her, what was her response to it?
it's like, I think grandma probably doesn't delve into it as deep as I probably have, and gone into the reflective sort of stages. I think for her, she sees it as a woman having her duties and knowing what her duties are, but not being afraid of stepping out of where she needs to be. So one of the protagonists, Jen Yu, who's played by Zhang Ziyi, who's this really pretty young girl who's a daughter of an official, and she escapes this arranged marriage to, I suppose, become who she wants to be in a spiritual sense, and trying to find who she is. And I think through traditional lens, I think my grandma would have gone, oh no, but she should have married this person that her parents have arranged a marriage for, because that was consistent with what my grandmother knew. But as she was watching it, she did tell me, she went, oh, isn't it amazing that this young woman could go out and do what she wanted to do, and she was so good at it. So I think I was getting the subliminal messages of it's okay to buck the trend, and it's also okay to try and find who you are without grandma explicitly saying it. Yeah, she's always sort of been my biggest supporter in everything I've done. So
yeah. So in that way, would you say that Jen's character, it serves as a role model?
Yes and no. And I think the movie is kind of interesting because it almost portrays two different types of feminine roles. So Jen is one of them, but Yu is played by Michelle Yeoh is probably the other one, and Michelle Yeoh's character was more about being the grounded, more mature, sort of more disciplined, and almost follows what society tells her she should do, and following the morals of what she thinks she should be doing. And then there's Jen, who's more of younger at heart and probably more feisty and follows her heart, and I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think there's virtue to both characters, and it's about choosing what makes sense for you and what's good for you. And I think that's the essence of the movie. It's following your heart, and that's what comes through at the very end. Without spoiling the ending for anyone who chooses to watch the movie, it's about making a decision that's true for you, and it can be so different for anyone. And I think that's what I love most about the movie, that it's not saying you have to follow one path. It's actually saying you can choose. And I think as a teenager at that point, that was really empowering for me to know that I could choose and I have choices. And I didn't have to do something where I felt that others said I had to follow. And I think that carries into my work now as well. It's not so much about...
Yeah, sorry, Pei, it keeps cutting out.
Oh, so good.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, so I think I was just saying it was more about, I think, the themes of the movie carry into sort of the way I work now with clients as well, that it's not so much about me deciding or the client deciding where we should go with therapy. It's us together being collaborative and coming up with solutions that's best for the client at the time.
Yeah.
And having the freedom to choose.
And I think we also talked about it the first time we met, how, it is really important that we work with the client. And it's interesting because in the film, like we mentioned, there's themes of authenticity and integrity. And of course, one of the main, one-liners, like gems of wisdom from the film, which is near the end, and hopefully not spoiling anything, but it's whatever path you take in life, be true to yourself. So I will not say who says that to who, but you're very much aware of who. And I'm just really curious, who would your favorite character be then in this film?
I was actually thinking about this last night and rewatched it and tried to go back. I think for me it would be Jen Yu. It would be just this young person who decided that she didn't want to follow the path of what was set out for her, wasn't afraid to challenge sort of life the life journey that others had plotted out for her, and wasn't afraid of making mistakes, and also followed her heart for a lot of the decisions that she made. Some, made mistakes, but also could reflect on those mistakes, and then almost reflect on where she needed to be and who she wanted to be. So I think her character probably undergoes the most growth. And I think for me, she was probably my favorite. Jade Fox, who is the baddie in this movie, her real name is Pepe, which is the same as my name, and
Yes.
and it actually Pei translates to Jade. So I think, and so
okay.
that initially for me, I thought, oh, maybe there's a lot of similarities with me and Jade just by namesake. As a child, that was where my brain sort of translated a lot of it. But no, I think I would go with Jinyu as my favorite character.
I would agree with that, actually. I think if I had to choose between the three, I guess, amazing kind of female archetypes, I would choose Jade as well. Sorry, Jen, not Jade. Yeah, I think she was really true to herself, like you said, and I loved how feisty she was. One of my favorite scenes is the when she's interrupted, when she's drinking tea, and then she's basically up against all these men in a tavern.
Yes.
Like just that was incredible. I wanted to mention a few scenes that really stood out to me, and just wondering your perspective on them as well. The other scene, I guess, one of the really epic scenes that a lot of people talk about is obviously the one-on-one combat scene between Jen and Lu. So when Jen uses the green dragon sword, and it's basically just one of the best kind of fight choreography that I've ever seen in any films. And then there's the other scene where there's a fight between Jen and her lover, Lo, who we haven't mentioned yet. And they're on two horses. Like I don't think I've seen that kind of scene in any other film in the past. And obviously, maybe I shouldn't mention this last scene because it kind of ruins it. It is a bit of a spoiler, but there is a death. There is a tragedy that occurs near the end of the film, and it's very emotional. It's a very passionate kind of scene, and it is very resonant with what you mentioned about going with the status quo and kind of honoring your duty. So I won't say any more about that. But were there any other scenes that stood out to you, or did you want to speak to any of the scenes that I mentioned?
I think the one that you mentioned, where I think it might be the one where it's between Jen Yu and Yu Shulian, where they, it's these two strong women who just go with each other. But I think what really stood out for me for one of the scenes, where Michelle Yeoh just says, "Stop, everybody out. This is just me and Jen Yu," and it's almost like a maternal response. It's, I am putting boundaries. We're causing chaos here, but I'm putting boundaries within this chaos. This is just you and me. It's personal. But no one else needs to be involved. And she's also saying, clearly you haven't got a mastery of your emotions and a mastery of managing your impulses. So let me teach you. And I loved it. And there's also the bamboo fighting, the bamboo forest, where Li Mubai, played by Chow Yun Fat, where he's just so calm. And I think, now watching it now as a therapist, he reminds me of a therapist that just allows the client to, to push back, to push boundaries, to challenge, to almost rage in whatever state that they might be in, and he's just reflecting, he's just mirroring, and he's giving them space, and he's imparting wisdom. I love the calm that he brings to it. I think sometimes in many of these fighting movies, like you've said, where it's always about, who's the strongest, most aggressive, whereas I think this movie very much shows how you can still win not a fight, but you you can stay calm, you can manage your emotions, and there doesn't need to be any casualties in the process.
Mm. Yeah, it's really fascinating that you mentioned him. I didn't actually think of that, the relevance with therapy, but that's very true. His character was always so composed, and he always had such a firm grip on his emotions. And I think that was really powerful for sure. I'm really curious though if you've seen the other film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny in 2016.
No, and I came across it a number of times, and
Mm.
I think I remember the main reason why I haven't watched it is because Michelle Yeoh actually texted one of her close friends and my aunties within that group of friends, and she says, "I'm the baddie in this next
Mhm.
iteration," and I think for me, I just couldn't tolerate the thought that she becomes this baddie. So
Mm.
I think I wanted to preserve her for who she was in the
Yeah.
original. And I think at that point I had moved to Australia as well, and it just didn't feel the same to watch it
Mhm.
without my grandma. But I did text grandma last night to say, "Hey, we should catch up. We should watch this the next time." And I
Yeah.
said it's been so long, and she went, "Oh, I knew it was there," but and then in true grandma form said, "But Michelle Yeoh's done all these other movies. Like we should watch all the other ones first. The better ones out there." Yeah, so no, I haven't.
Mm.
Is the short answer, but there are intentions to watch it. But I think at the time, I just couldn't. When I first heard that about the second movie, I think I
Yeah.
couldn't reconcile that. She was no longer this calm person of I don't know, sort of the good guy, and that she
Mm.
almost has a flip in her intentions.
Yeah. It must be pretty incredible to know her personally, and to watch her on screen and see her portray, these particular characters. I haven't seen the second film either. I hope it doesn't ruin the experience for you watching it and seeing her in that light. Um, maybe we both should watch it. We both
Yeah,
should
well, we
watch it
could
and
watch it
like let each
together.
other know
Yeah,
what we think. But
yeah.
we can watch it
Um,
together. Exactly.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so, in the beginning, you mentioned some themes. I love how you mentioned love, honor, duty. Was there another one that you said? Sorry, I don't know why I wrote honor
Love,
twice.
honor, duty. I think loyalty was probably the last one.
Loyalty, yes, yeah.
Yeah, and they really resonate. I think it
Mm,
feels very. I think those qualities and those values feel very much like home to me.
yes.
I think within our family there is a lot of reference um, to being. I think less so with love. I think love
Mm,
at times can be more of a westernized perspective on
right.
how people connect. I think within certainly within our family. I'm not speaking for anyone else, but I think
Mm,
within our family, I think loyalty probably comes over and beyond love. I think our family
mm,
demonstrates loyalty, in a easier way, and I think in a more natural way than I think that they do communicate love. Um, and they still love each other and love us.
yeah.
It's just that, um, yeah, I think those values just speak to our family.
Hmm. Hmm. And I kind of identified some other themes, and just wondering if you had anything that you wanted to say about it. So obviously, there's the conflict between freedom and desire.
Hmm.
There's, I mentioned integrity and authenticity, wisdom, like the warrior spirit, forgiveness. I wrote love as well, justice and revenge, and sorrow and solitude. Do any of them speak to you?
I think all of them do. All of them do come through in the
Hmm.
movie, and I think authenticity probably speaks most loudly to me, as you were mentioning
Mm.
some of those themes there. And I think Jen Yu's character in particular, in terms of how she's finding what's true for her, and also with Yu Shu Lian,
Hmm.
it's this tension. I think throughout the movie, I keep getting a sense of the tension between her duty and the freedom to choose what she really loves, and who she really loves is Li Mu Bai, and I think the same for him too, that he has a position of power to a certain extent, and wisdom and integrity, and he's also torn between how he balances that with love. So yeah, I think the undercurrent to the movie as well, despite all the tensions, is that balance. Is finding the balance and the center, and it's very. I think that's very in line with the martial arts theme of the movie as well. It's always trying to find a center, that things might throw you off center, and it's coming back to how you find middle ground and staying grounded.
Yeah, just wondering if you've seen Memoirs of a Geisha, because I guess that that stars Zhang Ziyi as well.
I have, although it's been so long, I think I couldn't really draw a lot from it. I did read the book as well, but I think there are themes that do cross over. It's it's the deconstruction of feminine roles that are ascribed to women, and almost how, I suppose to a certain extent, how the male masculine roles sort of construct the feminine roles and how they work together. And I think what I really love about movies like Mulan, like Memoirs of a Geisha, and also Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, it's about reimagining roles and having the freedom to do that.
Yeah. So would you say that these three films kind of break the mold?
Yeah, I think they do, and I think, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think as an Asian woman, looking at roles that are usually very rigid and very binary, and also sometimes very limiting, having movies like this where we're changing the script, we're changing the narrative, I think that's really exciting as well, and it makes the characters really empowering and exciting to follow, and also I think just gives me hope as well for the next generation, that we don't have to follow the path that that we're told for thousands of years, this is the path you should follow and that's the only path you can take, that you can recreate who you'd like to be in the future version of you.
Yeah, and I think like that would resonate with so many people, from different cultures anywhere in the world. So like the story is very universal, but obviously it has that, the very like cultural elements that are tied specifically to like Chinese culture and Wudan martial arts. So that actually exists, right? That's
From my understanding, it does. I think wuxia martial arts is probably what they refer to, and I think from what I understand, most of the actors had to do their own scenes. I don't think there was a lot of sort of stunt doubles. There might have been a few, but from what I was hearing, some of the actors and actresses had a few minor injuries in the filming.
Not surprised, yeah.
Yeah, and I did hear
some pretty intense scenes.
Yeah, and I did hear that they were training for a full year for a lot of the scenes. Choreography, and there was a lot of using safety lines, so they would hover. There's a lot of hovering in these movies.
Yes.
So it's teaching them how to land, how to move in space. So I think the movie, even though the storyline itself was really interesting to follow, I think the choreography and the martial arts scene was pretty spectacular as well.
Which scene? Sorry.
No, I was just saying, just generally with the movie, even though there was a very strong storyline, it was still very much about the artistry of martial arts, and I think they did it, good justice in terms of the athleticism as well as the grace that they brought to the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. I also found the score was very, very beautiful. The music that accompanied, like every scene was just so magnificent. I would actually call it magnificent. It was just really like emotive as well. And I mean, I know Ang Lee, so he's a pretty versatile director. Over the years, he's directed Life of Pi, Brokeback Mountain, Hulk, and Gemini Man, and like a whole range of films. Um, were there any other films that that he's directed that you also really enjoy?
I didn't realize he did Brokeback Mountain as well.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I think he from following a lot of the reviews, initially he was criticized for portraying some of the characters through a westernized lens, is what the critics were sort of putting forward to him. I probably disagree with some of that. I think it actually bridged the gap between sort of Western perspectives and sort of Eastern expectations of what some of the characters should be portrayed as. And I know there was also a lot of criticism about the language that the movie chose, because they use Mandarin, and Chow Yun-fat is from Hong Kong, so he speaks Cantonese, so his Mandarin isn't the greatest. So I think to his credit, they spent a lot of time honing his Mandarin, and Michelle Yeoh, I think, is more comfortable with Cantonese as well, but she really worked on her Mandarin for this film. I think coming back to sorry, just deviated, but coming back to your question on Ang Lee's and other movies, I wasn't aware that he was as versatile as he was, and I'm not surprised. And actually quite impressed with just the range of movies that he's worked on.
Yeah, and I've watched some interviews of actors who have worked with him. Apparently, he did Sense and Sensibility as well with Hugh Grant, and Hugh Grant was saying how Ang is a very exacting director. I mean, I know directors generally that's the kind of way that they are, but he was making a comment about that, and I was like, okay, well, like this is the thing. He obviously makes films of high quality, and he knows exactly what he wants. So, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure what the last film he directed was, but I'd love to know if he is directing something's in the process, and we can see some of his work soon. But yeah, thank you for talking to me about this film. It was really great to watch, actually, for the first time from my perspective, and I'll definitely be watching it again. So thank you for saying that it's your favorite film and for us to talk about it. But now I just want to say, so you have a very unique experience and knowledge in psychology and research. From the intro that I said about, what you currently do, what you have been doing, what we've been talking about, like when we actually met in person before. I'm just really curious what your mental health tips are, what you would like to share with listeners today.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I listened to some of your previous episodes too. I think lots of people have talked about the importance of the basics, such as your sleep, your nutrition, your regular meals, not using substances, and yes, I think that's probably where I start off with clients. But I think where I would extend, and it's something I'm trying to bring into a lot of my sessions now, is the concept of play. And what I mean by play is more about engaging in an activity or a hobby where there are no outcomes associated with it, no KPIs, no measures of success. I feel like we live in a world where we're always told to measure productivity, count your calories, count your steps, what's your weight, and track how fast you're running or how many hours you sleep. We've got gadgets that do all of that for us. So when I work with my clients, yes, it's important. We establish the foundations of sleep, nutrition, health, but we also look at when can we just have time off for, it doesn't have to be extensive, it doesn't have to be long. And I often say, let's be intentional about it, so it's not a mindless or dissociating exercise, but it's maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day where you can just be you. And coming back to the movie, be true to you. You know, what are the sort of activities that resonate with you, where your inner child can almost come through. I think a lot of the clients I do work with at the moment, it changes often, but at the moment, high functioning, have a lot of pressures on their day to day, and many of them are also young parents. So it's, you know, it might be 10 minutes where they, you know, might be knitting or baking or even engaging with a young child or a puppy, or going out to you know, into the garden and just being with nature for 5-10 minutes. Or it can be longer, where people go out on big hikes or they learn to master a different tool. But I often say there are no rules. The only rule is that it doesn't become an avoidance strategy or a harming or an activity that could potentially harm them. That's probably the only rule. So I think play, you know, we often in therapy, it's very outcomes focused. It's very much about how do we measure that you're doing well. That I say that's important, but also let's give you permission to just be you, and reset. I think one of my younger clients who's big on computer gaming talks about, sometimes I need a reset.
Yeah.
It's having that time, you know, whether it's play or reset or creativity, depending on, you know, what terminology we use. Yeah, so that's the first one. And related to that, I actually came across Kelly Lambert's work very recently. And she says when you use your hands, it activates a part of your brain, I don't know if you've heard of it, called the effort-driven rewards circuit. So, you know, when you're using your hands to do things like gardening or making pottery or knitting, or I have a friend who manually grinds her own coffee, I say, you know, this triggers the circuit and it really releases this happy neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin. So from an evolutionary perspective, our brains are programmed to gain neurobiological rewards from our physical efforts. So if you're using your hands to create something tangible or meaningful, or contribute to your resources for survival, that actually triggers a happy release of what I call the happy neurochemicals in your brain. So sometimes when I'm talking to my clients, I'll go, you know, is there something that you do with your hands, you know, whether it's being creative, whether it's touching, whether it's sensory, that just helps you feel good. So that's something that we work on. And the second thing I would say is it's related to the tracking of, you know, good sleep and good nutrition and exercise. I think almost every single client that I'm currently working with has their own journal. So it can be a therapy journal, or it can just be a log. It doesn't matter. I give clients the option, you know, you can go digital, you can go, you know, pen and paper. It's entirely up to you. But I think coincidentally, almost all my clients have chosen pen and paper, I think because it's tactile as well. And they use it to log, you know, not just the helpful habits, but we work really hard on self-reflexive and self-reflective skills. And you know, sometimes I realize that sometimes it transfers over and becomes this self-flagellating exercise. So I teach them, I say, look, you know, you got to be able to discern between when it's helpful and not helpful. So, you know, they might do a brain dump of what's happened in the day or what's troubling them, and it means they learn to either put the thoughts aside for the day, particularly if it's very intrusive, or they learn to give it a space to say, you know, you can live with me and you're really annoying, but for the moment I'll just tolerate you, or I'll learn to work with you, or I'll process you. And it goes hand in hand with the emotional regulation skills, I think. But it's a non-intrusive way of, you know, letting them be almost at one with their thoughts and not having to change it. So coming back to mindfulness, you know, not having to change it, not having to judge it, and just being aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of the exercise of the self-reflections, a lot of my clients are getting very good at this too. We do what's called a body scan,
Mm-hmm.
where I'll say, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, before you touch your phone, before you start checking for updates or notifications, just check in with your body. Do that, what you would do with your scrolling on apps. Do the scrolling through your body. Scroll through what's happening from your mind to your chest, to your shoulders. Is your body holding on to tension anywhere? Is there unfinished business? Are there niggling thoughts, or are you a bit tired? And I think when they're aware of how their body's starting off in the day, they can readjust the rest of the day and what it looks like for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope, and I talk them through it, and I say, this is about teaching you to just to be your own best friend, to just mirror and to look into you and just check in. And some of my clients have said that it's not just in the morning that I do it now. I'm noticing that I'm doing it when I'm standing in the lift or when I'm driving. And I think what's really wonderful, it's no longer just a conscious check-in. They'll say that sometimes it's an unconscious, almost automatic check-in, and then they'll readjust what they're doing at that point. And I think that's a really strong skill.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't require an extensive amount of effort. It's just a mini 2-second. How am I going? Am I good? And recognizing if they need a bit more time for themselves or whether they need time with others to connect. Or it's time for play, or whether it's, and I think sometimes we're so good at disconnecting from ourselves, whether it's being productive at work or I work with a lot of athletes as well, and sometimes my athletes are so wonderful at shutting out pain that in their day-to-day they forget to check in with themselves and just to see what their body needs.
Yeah. Those are such insightful and practical mental health tips. I'm guilty myself about shutting off emotions and being productive rather than checking in. So everything you just mentioned, I guess, for example, play is really mostly associated with children and young people, for example. But I think as adults, we really need to incorporate play in our day to day as well, and that's something that we tend to forget or take for granted. And I love what your client said about resetting. That's so true. I think we all need a reset from time to time. And it's good to be aware of that. And even just the concept of being your own best friend. The whole adage of, if a friend tells you something, like, how would you respond to them? So it's like our own like inner dialogue and our own self-talk is so pertinent. And I think, with journaling, with my clients as well, that's a big thing. I think being able to put pen to paper is in a way like much more it is much more powerful than like typing something out or just like keeping something in your head. I think it's good to kind of release like our emotions and our thoughts with no filter. I really love how you said that basically the body scan has become a habit, so it's been ingrained as a habit now, so it's almost like an unconscious activity that happens. That's when something's really effective and useful. So I think obviously you have really benefited your clients with that. And I haven't heard of the effort-driven reward circuit, so I will look into that. Is there like a book specifically about that, or like
No, I think it was an article. I think it was just an article I'd just come across. Kelly Lambert had written about it, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I was actually reflecting with one of my colleagues, and she said, oh, that's fascinating, because and she was joking, and she said, maybe this is why I love finger food so much, because I make the finger food, I eat it, and it's so rewarding on a dual level because I'm tasting it, but it's also I'm making it. And we were laughing about it, but it was great. I loved her example of it. But yeah, and I mean, it makes sense. I think when I look at it, and I can see how that relates to a lot of the activities I enjoy. And I think when people talk about gardening and how they find it so therapeutic, I can see how it would be, because you're touching the ground, you're touching the soil, you're picking and you're manipulating different textures. I think, slightly related to play, the concept of play, we don't do things to get dirty and get our hands into things as we get older, because it's seen as, it's time wasting, or it's not resourceful. So I can definitely see the benefits of, whether it's Play-Doh, like, kids and play therapy and Play-Doh, and using different textures, and the feedback that gives to your brain as well. I imagine that's, really therapeutic.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a friend not long ago how there should be like sensory classes for adults. I feel like we really focus that on children, but I think as adults we would really benefit from that as well. There's a movement in my life of friends who are really into knitting. So
Yes.
like I feel like that's something that maybe I can try to take up, because I haven't done that in years. But again, like you said, it's using our hands, getting down in the sandbox kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just getting our hands dirty and yeah.
And I think I feel like knitting seems to be a post-pandemic response. It seems to have been a coping strategy for a lot of people who are at home. I think bread making is the other one. Bread making and kneading and knitting, where you're using your hands and you're creating something, whether delicious or something you can wear.
Yeah, that's true. Kneading and knitting. I love that.
Yes.
So, Pei, I'm really curious. Do you want to tell our listeners about your research and your PhD?
Yeah, so I'm in my final 5 months of PhD, and if you talk to anyone who's completing their PhD, that's probably the most daunting time. So my research is on how children's views are heard in child protection proceedings, and to do that, I'm interviewing experts in the courts. So I don't know if you watch movies where there's usually an expert witness who speaks to children, and they convey those views to the court, and they also usually write reports. So my thesis was about the views of the experts themselves, who are usually social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and I also reviewed about 70 reports by these clinicians as well. So a lot of analysis, a lot of pulling apart themes, but essentially it's looking at how do we as mental health professionals, with these expertise, ensure that children have a say and have a voice about what is important to them, because decisions are being made about where they live, who they have contact with, how much they get to see mum and dad, how much they get to see their siblings. Sometimes siblings are separated, which is not the best, but sometimes that's necessary. And most of the time, decisions are made without children's input. So this is about how we recognize children's rights to have a part in decisions made about them. And a lot of the time, children in care also come with their own vulnerabilities. So, their own history of trauma. They might have had exposure to substances in utero. So sometimes it's really hard for them to communicate what they want to say or who's important to them. And coming back to our themes earlier on loyalty, there's the loyalty to family. I can't imagine any child who would want to say, mom and dad did this, therefore, I'm going to split my family apart. No child's ever going to say that. Most of the time they'll say, it wasn't as bad as what people are saying. I want to preserve my family. And that's a really tricky space for children. And clinicians are also very good at interpreting children's behaviors. So it's looking at how children might express who they feel safe with. So some of the assessments involves sitting with the child with their families and seeing, the nature of their relationships, their attachments, I've sat in a room where this young child, when the parent left the room, ran up to the door and put their backs to it, arms out wide to shut the parent out, and that's very telling. And in other situations, I've sat in a room where the child sees us as strangers who are breaking up the family, which is probably a fair assumption, and almost, just death stared us and just said, let me tell you about my family, because I am the expert of my family. If you are going to be making decisions, it's really important you know how I feel, and I think that's valid. Yeah, so that's what my research is about. It's about making sure that children's voices aren't lost in this process, because a lot of the times with proceedings, it's very much about what the parent's done, what the parent hasn't done, what the parent can do, what their arrangements are from a adult perspective. So it's making sure we look at the whole family unit, not just one side or both sides of the family.
Yeah. That sounds like really holistic, important work that you're doing. And it's about time that children are seen as experts in their own lives, and that their voices are listened to and actually respected. So thank you. I'm excited to read it once it's done.
Thank you.
If you want to share it.
Yes.
But was there anything else you wanted to share with us today?
I think it was just joyous to be able to just, go back to this movie that had, a lot of childhood memories for me, but then also looking in, through a lens now that's obviously very different, like 20 years down the track, in terms of just seeing how far we've come. In terms of, I think that those values of honor, duty, loyalty hasn't changed, but how we express them and how we've adapted in 21st century is so interesting. Not just for women, but just for everyone, of how we balance family and also what's important to us, and mastery of skill, because essentially that's also what the movie is about, of how you balance a skill set that you have, and what's philosophically important to you, and how you balance that with other things that's important in your life, whether it's a loved one, or whether it's a community, or whether it's one person or two people, and whether there's tensions between those worlds.
Yeah, I think the key theme that we talked about today, I guess, is balance. Like you mentioned before, balance is such a huge thing in life, in all aspects of life, really. But thank you for talking to us about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and sharing your unique mental health tips today. And maybe if we end up watching the second installment, we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, a little
Thank
catch
you,
up.
Pei. Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telemoods by eClapper Project Inc. Telemoods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telemoods today.